There's nothing to talk about. No sooner had she said that than Madeline threw the freshly served, steaming hot tea at her son, Mason. Shocked into silence, I stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Noticing my reaction, she pressed on. Both father and son utterly useless. At that moment, something inside me snapped. The next thing I knew, I was shouting louder than I ever had in my life. Call the president, now. My name is Marcus York. I'm a 48-year-old man known for my calm demeanor, and I have lived a life free of regrets. Of course, there were crossroads in my life along the way. Perhaps I had made some wrong choices. However, my life with my family and the success of the company I built have given me a deep sense of fulfillment. Naturally, I still strive to improve my company and bring more happiness to my family, but I have no significant regrets about my life. I was born into a branch family of a distinguished lineage, but that alone did not make me wealthy. My connection to the main family was weak, just the occasional New Year's greeting. While there were a few branch families that were close-knit, for the most part, we only knew each other's names. My father was an ordinary company employee. After working at a major corporation for several years, I decided to start my own business with trusted colleagues. The early days were full of struggles, but once we got the hang of things, my foresight proved correct. Our products became a hit. And as trends shifted in our favor, the company grew. I met my wife, Rachel, around the time I was considering expanding into subsidiaries. As I mentioned before, aside from my calm nature, I am not an extraordinary man. I was never called handsome, just a plain-looking guy with a gentle personality, often labeled as dull or lacking charisma. My wife had a similar disposition. She never made extreme statements, was quiet but responsible, and a highly dependable and competent employee at my company. She was in charge of accounting at the time, but as the clerical workload often fell behind, she took it upon herself to handle my communications and schedule adjustments. Naturally, we started seeing each other more often, and she became someone I could talk to easily. It was me who first invited her out for a meal as a way to express my gratitude. "I'd love to," she replied, her small smile endearing. As we spent more time together outside of work, we got to know each other better, and our bond deepened. However, at one point, I had a moment of doubt and asked her if she was really okay with someone as plain as me. Rachel gave me a cool, serene smile and said, "I think your movements and posture are graceful. And I admire how you always listen first, think carefully, and then choose your words wisely." She even added that she felt sorry for being such an unremarkable woman herself. Not to be outdone, I immediately responded, "That's not true at all. You have a calm presence, you quietly observe everything around you, and you always take the necessary actions. You're quick-witted and kind-hearted." Hearing my words, her cheeks flushed slightly, and a few months later, I proposed, and we became husband and wife. Our friends congratulated us, though I was aware that some thought we were a rather unremarkable couple. Even when we heard such comments, Rachel and I simply smiled and let them pass. There was no need to stir up trouble and ruin one of the happiest days of our lives. As long as our families and colleagues celebrated with us, that was enough. We were mature enough not to let meaningless words from irrelevant people bother us. A year later, we were blessed with a child, and Rachel left her job to focus on raising our family. I was busy with my ever-growing company, but thanks to the help of my trusted colleagues, I managed to come home on time more often than I expected and help Rachel with raising our child. Together, Rachel and I poured our hearts into raising our son, Mason, and he became our pride and joy. Mason graduated from university with excellent grades. He expressed his desire to gain the knowledge and experience necessary to eventually take over my position as chairman of our 15-group company network. After carefully considering his options, he chose a company on his own and successfully secured a job offer. Like us, he has a rather plain and unremarkable appearance, but his personality has a sharp edge. That said, he seems to have inherited my aversion to unnecessary trouble. He never starts fights or throws out insults. However, the way he skillfully avoids getting involved in conflicts reminds Rachel of me, and she often laughs about it. And so, Mason chose his own workplace and began his career. He started working at one of our group's subsidiaries, an apparel company that runs its own brand. I want to experience firsthand how trends rise and fall in the real world, he told me. Since he had thought it through and made his own choice, I decided to watch over him without interfering. Only the presidents of our group companies knew that Mason was my son. None of the regular employees were aware. It was his wish, and I agreed with him. He probably didn't want to be seen as someone riding on nepotism, and workplace hierarchy mixed with family ties never leads to anything good. Still, from time to time, I would visit the branch office under the pretense of delivering messages from Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor laughed, saying I was being overprotective, but I believe it's only natural for a parent to want to see their child at work. Occasionally, Marcus would spot me and make a displeased face, but he never said anything, just returned to his work. Watching him diligently follow his senior's instructions, taking notes, and handling tasks with care filled me with pride. After checking on him, I would take the opportunity to tour the office, and it was during one of these visits that I noticed someone who stood out. There was a woman whose beauty was nothing short of striking. She was dressed in an outfit far too flashy for business casual, making her presence impossible to ignore. My first impression was that being so conspicuous must be exhausting. But from the way she carried herself, it was clear she was actively trying to stand out. Well, given that the first floor of this branch was a retail store for their brand, having an eye-catching staff to enhance the brand's image was probably important. In fact, several apparel stores had employees known as charismatic staff. Individuals who acted as walking advertisements, showcasing the best ways to wear the brand's products, coordinate outfits, and match accessories. However, something felt off. She was certainly striking and attention-grabbing, but she lacked the unique appeal that the other charismatic staff had. Still, she was undeniably a key sales figure for the store. More importantly, she was a new hire. Perhaps for now, she was just focused on dressing up, but in time, she would learn how to properly highlight the brand's products. With that thought, I paid her little mind and walked past her. "Oh, my apologies, sir." She had accidentally bumped into my shoulder while passing by and immediately apologized. But the moment she saw my face, she realized I wasn't a customer. Her demeanor changed entirely. "You work here, don't you? Please use the back entrance. A plain-faced guy like you has no business in a store like this, right?" With a mean-spirited chuckle, she walked away. I stood there, dumbfounded. Even if I was an internal employee, that kind of attitude was unacceptable. If she acted like that again, should I step in and correct her? No, coming from me, it might be too harsh. I needed to find a subtle way to let Erin, the branch manager, know. Her name, I later learned, was Madeline. When I got home, I asked my son about her, and he told me quite a bit. She loves attention and has a flashy personality. As Erin's daughter, she is allowed to behave quite selfishly, and it seems that Erin's son, who dislikes standing out, generally tries to stay away from her. She's always surrounded by an entourage, and even when I have business with her, they get in the way. It's exhausting. He described her behavior as if she were playing princess, making it clear that he didn't see her as a pleasant colleague. It must be frustrating when it's hard to communicate properly at work. Yeah. And on top of that, messages often don't get through. Her followers decide on their own whether something is worthy of reaching her. And they even draft documents without knowing the details. It's a nightmare. It seemed she was at the center of more trouble than I had expected. That sounds rough. Do you think she even realizes what her entourage is doing? If her followers were acting on their own, perhaps she was also a victim of their overzealousness. But before I could finish my thought, my son let out a deep sigh. She knows exactly what's happening. She told me herself, since she's the branch manager's daughter and from a distinguished family, she gets to choose which tasks she handles. She said minor chores should just be passed to others, and we shouldn't bother stopping her for trivial matters. Given that Mason was constantly running around, handling those very trivial matters to keep the branch running smoothly, I could only imagine how he felt about her arrogance. Hearing Mason's unusually low and irritated voice surprised me, but I realized this probably wasn't the first time he had dealt with something like this. "Are you okay? This isn't turning into a serious conflict, is it?" I make sure it doesn't. I'm the one making reasonable arguments, after all. She puts on a good front in public. So if I say things loud enough for others to hear, things tend to go surprisingly smoothly. Mason smirked as he said this, clearly pleased with himself. Still, I could tell he must have gone through a lot of stress to figure out how to navigate these situations. Just hearing about her is enough to make her seem unbearable, but it's also unacceptable that Aaron does nothing about it. I had tried to subtly let Aaron know what was happening, but there was no indication that my message had gotten through. And Madeline's outrageous behavior showed no signs of stopping. Recently, Mason's sighs had become more frequent, and he seemed noticeably more worn out. He wasn't the type to complain, so I worried that he was keeping everything bottled up. But when I asked how things were going, he only smiled wryly and said, "Same as always. I'm fine. I'm used to it." Even Rachel noticed that his appetite had decreased and was becoming increasingly concerned. There was no sign that Aaron was taking any action regarding Madeline. On the contrary, Mason's overtime hours had skyrocketed. Apparently, much of the extra work had been dumped on him by other employees. Because Madeline found his complaints annoying, her entourage had started harassing him. The harassment itself was subtle, things like submitting documents without the requested corrections, delaying urgent paperwork until the last minute, and other minor inconveniences. Some might dismiss them as simple mistakes. But when the same mistakes happen repeatedly, it's no accident. His colleagues, concerned for him, would occasionally help out, but Mason had always been someone who preferred to handle his own responsibilities. Feeling guilty about burdening others, he pushed himself even harder, which only led to more exhaustion. At one point, when he asked Madeline for her signature on an important document, her entourage tried to block him. He had calmly but firmly stated, "This is her responsibility, and it needs her signature. It's meaningless without it." In response, they began mocking him, pointing out how his co-workers had been helping him and accusing him of not being able to handle his own workload. Soon, the rumors spread, branding him as someone incompetent. After discussing the situation with Rachel, we decided it was time to take action. We arranged a direct meeting with Aaron. That being said, it's not something as extreme as a violent confrontation. All we did was reach out to Aaron to set up a meeting and ask him to arrange a discussion. At first, Aaron showed no interest, but after going through Mr. Taylor, he finally agreed to a meeting. And so, after much back and forth, the meeting day arrived. Mason and I sat in the reception room, waiting for Aaron. Everything starts with a conversation. Misunderstandings can often lead to unnecessary conflicts. Just as I was about to greet them, Madeline spoke first. "What, you brought your dad along just to pick a fight with me? You're such a pain, so damn annoying." Her words were sharp and cutting. She clearly saw us as nothing more than complainers. "Madeline, be quiet for a moment." Aaron tried to intervene, but she wasn't having it. "Dad, stay out of this. Mom said I could do whatever I wanted at work, remember? But Mr. Taylor specifically told me to handle this matter with care. Please, consider my position as branch manager." At this, Madeline reluctantly fell silent. Watching a relieved Aaron, I somehow sensed that he was probably a son-in-law who married into the family. Soon after, a female employee entered, served tea, bowed, and quietly exited the room. Just as we were about to start the discussion, it happened. There's nothing to talk about. Before anyone could react, Madeline grabbed the freshly served, steaming tea and threw it at Mason. I froze in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Noticing my stunned silence, she pressed on. Both father and son utterly useless. What is she saying? This woman. Did she just throw hot tea at my son, my pride and joy? Water dripped from his hair and face, soaking his clothes. Fortunately, he quickly wiped himself off with a cold towel, preventing any serious burns. But that very act made me realize something chilling. This wasn't the first time this had happened to him. At that moment, something inside me snapped. Immediately after, I raised my voice louder than I ever had before. Call Mr. Taylor. Right now. My voice echoed through the quiet room. It wasn't the kind of undignified shouting of a child throwing a tantrum, nor was it a desperate scream. It was simply spoken with enough force and authority that everyone in the room understood it was a command. Even Mason looked surprised, while Aaron and his daughter recoiled under the weight of my words, falling into stunned silence. After a brief moment of stillness, hurried footsteps approached from the next room, and the reception door swung open. Aaron! What the hell have you done? The man who stormed in was none other than Mr. Taylor, the man entrusted with managing this brand and one of my long-standing subordinates. Mr. Taylor. This is... Aaron stammered, desperately trying to explain himself. In contrast, Madeline, having regained her composure, stood tall and spoke with confidence. Yes, that's right. These people are nothing more than complainers harassing me. Can't you do something about them at the company level? Her audacity and sheer nerve were first class, I give her that. But that was all. Her words carried no dignity, no real substance, just arrogance. Handle this at the company level? Do you two even know who he is? Mr. Taylor looked at her in disbelief. Of course, I do. I went to the same university as that guy. I even acknowledged him as a fellow branch family member out of politeness. But he's been full of himself ever since. He doesn't even know his place. I was stunned. I had no idea Madeline and Mason had gone to the same university. Now that I thought about it, Mason had once mentioned that there was someone from a related branch family, but he never brought it up again. So I hadn't given it much thought. Both of your families are branch families, and our company has no connection to the main family. Mason didn't use the family name to get into this company. Madeline narrowed her sharp eyes at me. She was certainly a beautiful woman, and her gaze carried intensity. But to me, she was nothing more than an arrogant young woman. And really, what was this nonsense? Mason is my pride and joy. Why should I let this spoiled girl look down on him? You can't prove that. Besides, the one getting in my way over trivial matters is this guy right here. If you're his father, at least teach him some proper discipline. Mason is my son, and he is someone I am proud of no matter where he goes. I stated it clearly, without hesitation. Madeline was momentarily speechless. Mason, on the other hand, had his hands over his face. His ears were red, I could tell he was embarrassed. And speaking of discipline, Aaron, I have a question for you. How did your daughter end up like this? I deliberately ignored Madeline's words and spoke to Aaron instead. When I looked straight at Aaron and spoke, he looked slightly surprised. Hey! Don't ignore me. Be quiet for a moment. Madeline shrieked, but before she could cause another scene, Mr. Taylor's voice cut in, firm and absolute. For once, even Madeline couldn't disobey. She shut her mouth, though her glare remained filled with resentment. I ignored her completely. Aaron, watching this unfold, let out a small chuckle before bowing his head. I sincerely apologize for my daughter's behavior. What? Why are you apologizing, Dad? Stop it. Are you trying to disgrace our family name? Enough. You're the one who's been disgracing our family name all this time. It's about time you realize that. Aaron let out a long, exhausted sigh. His words, spoken in a tone of utter exhaustion, carried a weight that even Madeline couldn't immediately argue against. I apologize for all the trouble my daughter has caused, Mr. York. Oh? You knew who I was? I realized after Mr. Taylor arrived. Also, I recalled seeing you during New Year's visits. There was no doubt in my mind. Aaron, looking as worn out as a man twice his age, let out another sigh and finally spoke. The root of all this is Madeline's one-sided crush. A one-sided crush. I could hardly believe what I had just heard. Madeline had a crush? It didn't seem to fit her at all. Setting aside her personality, she was undeniably beautiful and talented. Since she had attended the same university as my son, she must have been intelligent as well. And yet, she had been in love with someone? Who? The thought barely crossed my mind before I turned sharply to look at my son. Realizing my gaze, Mason averted his eyes at lightning speed. What is this about, Mason? Your father never heard a word about this. It's not exactly something I needed to announce. It was a private matter. Hold on. Who's supposed to have had a crush on who? I only got rejected once. I'm not hung up on it anymore. So, Mason had rejected Madeline. It must have been back in their university days. I just said, our families match, and your grades aren't bad, so I wouldn't mind dating you. That's all. But this guy. That wasn't a misunderstanding, that was just a confession that ended in rejection. Unable to bear my silent stare any longer, Mason finally spoke. I told her I don't date based on family status or academic performance. I asked her to find someone else. It was a very straightforward response. But as words to turn down a confession, it was undeniably harsh. I can't believe it. I went out of my way to acknowledge you, and that was your response? You're the worst. Having likely never been rejected before, Madeline must have found Mason unforgettable. But her pride wouldn't allow her to admit it. So instead, she had been venting her frustrations by treating Mason as someone beneath her. Enough, Madeline. You found out Mason was joining this company, and you used my authority to force your way in here, didn't you? Wait. Dad, please stay out of this. Listen carefully. You may not realize it, but our family is on the brink of losing everything. If I lose my job, that's one thing. I can separate from this family, and you and your mother will still have your grandfather's support. His words were calm but carried an ominous weight. Madeline fell silent. But if you've angered Mr. York, and the details of what you've done to Mason come to light, and this reaches the main family, what do you think will happen? After Aaron's explanation, Madeline finally seemed to grasp the situation, and her face turned pale. But, our families are equals. Why would the main family take issue with us? Even if our families are of the same rank, the difference in influence is enormous. Marcus's father is the chairman of a conglomerate with 15 companies under him. Whether they like it or not, even the main family acknowledges his financial power. Why didn't anyone tell me that? Not my mother, not grandfather. Seeing Madeline panic, Aaron's expression grew even wearier. Because your mother and grandfather wanted you to marry Mason. They kept encouraging you, hoping you wouldn't give up. And I, knowing that, failed to stop them. That's my responsibility. What? Marriage? What are you even talking about? At Aaron's words, Madeline's face turned bright red, and she became visibly flustered, seemingly at a loss for words. With a deep, heavy sigh, Aaron let out his words. In the end, this entire mess started because she couldn't properly process being rejected. Her mother and grandfather kept stoking the flames. And her unrequited love spiraled out of control. Hearing all of this, my anger had completely faded. There had been so many unexpected revelations that I could no longer hold on to my frustration. So, with that said, Mr. Taylor, Mr. York, please allow me to take full responsibility for this incident by resigning. Aaron lowered his head, his tone filled with desperation. If I step down, Madeline won't have the same unchecked authority she does now. And if word spreads that Mr. Taylor reprimanded her, her entourage will likely dwindle. However, please let her continue working here. Both Mr. Taylor and I were listening to Aaron's desperate plea. Madeline does have a talent for sales. If she's given time, her arrogance may subside. I will ensure she stays away from Mason. Please, I beg you. His forehead was pressed against the table as he repeatedly pleaded. Aaron, you married into your wife's family, didn't you? Yes. And my wife was pampered her whole life. She has never worked a day in her life. If our family falls apart, she won't be able to support herself. But if you resign, won't they force you into a divorce? Most likely. I'll be labeled incompetent and discarded. But she'll simply return to her family home, while I'll be fine on my own. Aaron let out a bitter laugh, but his face was filled with sorrow. You love your wife, don't you? At my words, Aaron blinked, then gave a gentle smile and said, Yes. More than anything in this world. Oh. Madeline let out a high-pitched yelp at her father's unexpected confession, her cheeks flushing as she stared at him in shock. I was originally your grandfather's subordinate. From a young age, I admired his daughter. That's why I threw myself into my work with everything I had. His dedication paid off. He earned recognition for his abilities and was ultimately chosen from among several candidates to marry his wife. It was practically an arranged marriage. But I was overjoyed. All I wanted was to make her happy. I indulged her whims, never scolded her, and even refrained from interfering in how our child was raised. And now, I'm paying the price for it. That was why, he said, he was willing to take full responsibility as her father. Aaron turned to his daughter with a serious expression. Madeline, this is as far as I can take you. From now on, you'll have to support your mother and build a life for yourself. Think carefully about what you need to do. There won't be a second chance. If you fail again, you and your mother may end up with nothing. And this time, I won't be there to save you. Dad. As the next head of the family, act with dignity. Be ashamed of your past actions and words as a person. And forget about Mason. Look forward and live your life with confidence in your own way. That is my wish for you. With that, Aaron wrapped his daughter in a firm embrace. Oh, Dad. Have I done something truly terrible? She still didn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation, but she was beginning to reflect on her actions. Her voice trembled with uncertainty. Yes, you have. That's why you must never make the same mistake again. Think about your position and your responsibilities. Speak with care. You wouldn't want to end up like me, would you? Knowing he was about to lose his job, his wife, and his place in her family, Aaron held his daughter in his arms, his last lesson to her before he let go. How did I end up witnessing such a dramatic family confrontation? At this point, I had almost forgotten what I was even mad about in the first place. Well then, Mr. York, what do you want to do? Aaron seems dead set on resigning. Leaving aside his failure to rein in his daughter, he's competent at his job, isn't he? Yes. He turned around a struggling branch and brought it back to success. He has many loyal subordinates. It would be a waste to let him go. His daughter was another issue entirely, but as a professional, Aaron was someone I wanted to keep around. However, considering the fact that I had just revealed my position as chairman and all of Madeline's actions against Mason had come to light, I couldn't simply let this go without consequence. As I was deliberating, Mason, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. So, what you're saying is that I didn't even realize that was her version of a heartfelt confession. And I just brushed it off like casual small talk? Meaning I share some responsibility for all this? What? You didn't even realize it was a confession? No. The way she said it made it sound like she was recruiting me as one of her entourage from above, not confessing her love. Considering how Madeline had worded things, I could understand why he misunderstood. What? Do you have any idea how much courage it took for me to approach you alone? Oh yeah, now that you mention it, you were alone that time. Your usual entourage wasn't with you. Mason nodded and said, I see. Seeing this, Madeline's face turned bright red before she burst into tears. Large droplets streaming down her cheeks. Ah, I didn't mean to make you cry. I'm not crying. As if I'd cry over something you said. She stood her ground, even as the tears continued to flow, glaring at Mason with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Regardless, I admit it. I was rejected by you, and I took it out on you with petty harassment. That was disgraceful behavior for a lady. I will undergo training and return as a better person. So please, fire me instead of my father. Wait. You plan to come back? That is not the issue right now. Watching their back and forth, I couldn't hold back my laughter anymore. Ha ha ha. You two are completely in sync. Where? In what way? Their voices overlapped in perfect harmony, making me laugh even harder. Yeah, this is it. This is one of those times when parents should stay out of it. Aaron, lift your head. I won't be making a big deal out of this incident. Ha? No, but that's unthinkable. It's fine. I only stepped in because this had the potential to cause major problems for the company. I turned my gaze to Madeline and Mason and continued speaking. In the end, this was nothing more than a childish quarrel. It wasn't something for parents to get involved in. A childish quarrel. Aaron looked stunned. Ha ha ha. You're right. That's exactly what it was. Let's leave this to the younger generation to sort out. It's not our place to meddle. He patted Aaron on the back in encouragement. You still have a lot of work to do, Aaron. We can't have you resigning over something as trivial as a children's spat. Hearing this, Aaron bowed his head deeply. Mr. Taylor, Mr. York, thank you. I will continue to do my best from here on. His shoulders trembled slightly, and noticing this, Madeline stepped forward, gently patting her father's back before bowing as well. I sincerely apologize for everything. I had no idea my reckless actions would cause my father so much pain. I am ashamed of my own foolishness. Please, forgive me. I glanced at Mason, silently asking what he wanted to do. He frowned but answered plainly. If I couldn't even forgive this, then I really would be a child. Then, with a sigh, he muttered something uncharacteristic. Honestly, though, it was you adults who made this into such a big deal. And isn't it the grown-ups' job to clean up after kids' fights? With that, he simply said, I have work to do, and walked straight out of the reception room. Hey! That attitude of yours is exactly why people find you so frustrating. Are you even listening? Madeline shouted after him, her frustration clear. Realizing her outburst, she quickly clamped her mouth shut upon seeing me. It's fine, it's fine. That kid does have a habit of being blunt. You can head back to work too, Madeline. Yes. Understood. Excuse me. With a slight bow at my words, Madeline also ran off. Judging by her determination, she'd probably catch up to Mason and give him a piece of her mind, but at this point, I wasn't worried anymore. And what should I do now? Aaron still seemed uncertain. I gestured for him to sit down, and both Mr. Taylor and I took our seats as well. I called my secretary to bring fresh tea, and once it arrived, I spoke leisurely. Since we have the time, why don't we, as parents, talk about our kids' growth? Mr. York, isn't that a bit cruel to Aaron, considering the circumstances? Based on how things had been going, Mr. Taylor gave that advice, to which Aaron responded in a firm tone. No, it's fine. I certainly owe an apology for what happened today, but my daughter also has many good qualities. I will gladly speak about them. For the first time, he wasn't speaking as a branch manager, he was speaking as a father. And so, we began our impromptu gathering of doting parents, exchanging stories about our children. In the end, the harassment Marcus faced was officially labeled as a personal dispute rather than a major company issue. And it was resolved with a formal warning. Madeline's entourage disbanded, and as long as the urgency was properly conveyed, she now signed documents without issue. The tense atmosphere in the workplace disappeared, and both of them diligently carried out their respective duties. Ha ha. I suppose we worried too much. Rachel chuckled after hearing how things turned out. Yeah. Looking back, Mason probably figured he only had to endure for a little longer since he was set to transfer to another branch in a few months anyway. He does tend to think like that. A little too thick-headed when it came to emotions. In just a few months, Mason would be transferred to another branch, working in a completely different field. Who would eventually take over my position? Because Mason understands better than anyone that personal feelings should not interfere with work. He has shown determination to push himself and has steadily built up his achievements. As I watch my child grow, I hope he overcomes the long and difficult road ahead. With this incident, Mason and Madeline have likely overcome one obstacle and grown even more. Not just Mason, but even Madeline had undergone a dramatic transformation. With each milestone she reached, Aaron would send me letters expressing his gratitude, and before I knew it, I had become well-versed in her progress. Honestly, Aaron is a bit much. I get that he's proud of his daughter, but all these letters, I muttered, staring at the growing stack of them. Rachel laughed. And yet, you're just as happy, aren't you? Now you finally have someone to brag about our son to. Rachel chuckled quietly, a knowing smile on her face. She had long since seen through the fact that I had been exchanging letters with Aaron, trying to outdo each other with stories of our children's accomplishments. On a peaceful afternoon, in between work, I sat with Rachel, reminiscing about our family. I was a lucky man. Beneath a clear blue sky, a white chapel rang its bells, blessing the newlyweds. Colorful petals danced through the air in a flurry of flower showers. And standing at the center of it all was Madeline, radiant in a stunning wedding dress, smiling as she tossed her bouquet. And the man holding her in a bridal carry, dressed in a crisp white tuxedo, was none other than my son. Never saw this coming. Neither did I. Standing side by side, Aaron and I, now more like doting fathers than ever, watched the ceremony unfold with murmured disbelief. Almost 10 years had passed since that eventful day, when Madeline and Mason reunited after so long. They started off reminiscing about how foolish they had been back then. That conversation had quickly reignited something between them. And before we knew it, their bond had deepened. Now, Madeline was a renowned coordinator, making waves across multiple branches with her skill and expertise. Mason, meanwhile, continued transferring between branches, steadily building his career and earning high-ranking positions wherever he went. They supported each other's dreams, never interfering, yet always encouraging one another. It was a dynamic they both found comfortable. Looking back, that entire incident a decade ago seemed like nothing more than a lover's quarrel. So, the childish quarrel has now been upgraded to a lover's spat, huh? Would you call that an upgrade? I asked, glancing at Aaron. He smiled warmly and replied, "Lovers' quarrels lead to happiness." Of course, it's an upgrade. Hearing his quiet laughter, I couldn't help but agree and laugh along. The sky was clear and bright. Today, I had gained a new family member. Russell, listening to our conversation, laughed with genuine joy. Yeah. Life was good.